Welcome back to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the high-stakes geopolitical drama behind the recent historic plunge in the Japanese yen, and, frankly, the sudden hyper-aggressive international intervention to save it. We aren't just talking about abstract currency exchange rates today. We're looking at global financial dominoes that could very easily land right on your doorstep and impact your own investments.
To really grasp the sheer magnitude of what just went down in the global markets, we've got to start with this highly provocative statement from Donald Trump regarding the sudden United States involvement in Japan's currency crisis. When a former U.S. president and current candidate starts explicitly commenting on Japanese currency mechanics, well, it signals something absolutely crucial. This has officially escalated from a localized economic headache into a massive geopolitical priority.
Here's the setup. The Japanese yen had crashed to a staggering 40-year low. We're talking approaching a severely weakened 164 yen just to buy a single US dollar. It was literally an absolute free fall. But then, almost overnight, a shocking, coordinated intervention forcefully dragged that number back down to the 155 range. To move the needle that fast, the sheer market force required is just staggering.
Which brings us to the ultimate mystery of today's explainer. What hidden motive would compel the United States to step in and aggressively buy yen for the first time since the 1998 Asian financial crisis? For nearly 3 decades, the U.S. has strictly left currency fluctuations to the invisible hand of the free market. So why now? What exactly forced their hand?
Section 1. The 28-year exchange rate rescue op.
So this historic intervention, it wasn't some spur-of-the-moment panic button. It was a highly calculated move. To give you an idea of the sheer scale here, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was photographed carrying a secret memo outlining a massive $5 to $10 billion purchase of Japanese yen. This whole thing had been quietly brewing since the September joint statement. It accelerated through emergency meetings in Tokyo in May and ultimately culminated in that historic July 31st intervention.
Section 2. Why the U.S. pulled the trigger. The secret motive for this massive U.S. intervention lies in one colossal vulnerability. Check this out. Japan is the world's largest foreign holder of U.S. debt. They are sitting on $1.14 trillion in U.S. treasuries. Trillion, with a T. In global finance, that isn't just a big pile of money. That is incredible leverage. The United States simply could not ignore the sheer power Japan holds over the American bond market. Think about the domino effect. If Japan desperately needed dollars to intervene and save the yen themselves, they'd be forced into a corner, right? They'd likely have to dump those U.S. treasuries on the open market. Doing so would instantly crash treasury prices and send U.S. interest rates absolutely spiking right before a November election. It would make mortgages, car loans, and credit cards instantly more expensive for everyday Americans. It was a systemic vulnerability the U.S. simply had to prevent at all costs.
So to bypass this massive threat, authorities utilized a brilliant, albeit relatively obscure, workaround called the FEMA Repo Facility. Instead of Japan selling off their treasuries and crashing the market, this facility allows them to quietly park those treasuries as collateral in exchange for short-term dollars. It's honestly a masterful piece of geopolitical maneuvering. It gets Japan the dollars it needs without completely breaking the U.S. bond market in the process.
Let's look at Section 3, Structural Trap of the Plunging Yen.
But, despite that clever maneuvering to put out the immediate fire, a Band-Aid doesn't fix the underlying disease. The yen is bleeding out due to a perfect storm of structural weaknesses. First off, Japan has a massive reliance on imported oil, gas, and food. Second, you've got growing inflation being worsened by Middle East conflicts driving up those energy costs. And third, the Bank of Japan maintains a stubbornly low 1% policy rate, which leaves them completely out of step with the rest of the developed world.
Compounding all of that is this profoundly alarming figure, 202.9%. That is Japan's staggering government debt as a percentage of its GDP, as projected by the IMF for this year. To put that into perspective, their debt is more than double the size of their entire economy. It's the absolute highest debt burden among all G20 nations, which severely limits their ability to maneuver without risking a total economic collapse.
Now add to that Prime Minister Takaichi's highly aggressive expansionary policies. We're talking about a plan that involves pouring 370 trillion yen into strategic tech, like AI and semiconductors, while simultaneously slashing the food sales tax from 8% all the way down to 1%. When you combine already historic debt with massive new spending sprees, while the government has to print or borrow even more money, the result is a recipe for severe fiscal anxiety and a currency that investors desperately want to flee from.
Which brings us to Section 4, Butterfly Effect on Global Markets.
To truly grasp the global threat here, we've got to understand a vital financial concept called the yen carry trade unwinding. Think of the yen carry trade like a giant invisible dam holding back immense global financial pressure. For years, global investors have essentially used Japan as a massive ATM. They borrow yen at almost zero interest to fund huge, highly lucrative investments all over the globe.
But here's what happens when that dam bursts. If this US-Japan intervention makes the yen suddenly strong, those cheap loans investors took out, they suddenly become incredibly expensive to pay back. To cover those skyrocketing debts, investors are forced into a massive, panicked sell-off of their riskier global stocks. It creates a terrifying domino effect across international exchanges, leading to a global financial whiplash that can easily wipe out retirement accounts worldwide.
Finally, Section 5, Response for Korean Economy and Us.
So how does this hit closer to home? While a weak yen traditionally pressured the South Korean won's export competitiveness, a sudden, violent rebound, engineered by the US and Japan, is arguably much worse. Why? Because it risks triggering that exact massive carry trade unwinding we just talked about. This unwinding acts like a financial tsunami, threatening to flood South Korean and adjacent global markets with severe volatility and sparking rapid capital flight from emerging markets.
The ultimate takeaway here? The US and Japan have made their move. By drawing a hard, definitive line in the sand at 164 yen, they've proven they are more than willing to use heavy financial artillery to defend their geopolitical interests. In doing so, they're permanently reshaping the global financial chessboard. They are serving notice to speculators that betting against the yen right now, it means going directly against the United States Treasury. As the global market fiercely adjusts to this reality of sudden currency interventions and the terrifying prospect of unwinding decades of cheap yen, we have to leave you with one vital question. If the era of the weak yen comes to a crashing halt tomorrow, taking global liquidity down with it, is your portfolio actually safe? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep a very close eye on those markets.